You know, I think a lot of people want to learn how to build in Minecraft. It's a fantastic platform for those who want to express their creativity without having to get into anything too complicated or technical. But when I decided to look through YouTube for some tips and tricks for my own building, I noticed the most recent building tutorials are all a few years old by now. But there's a lot of cool new blocks and decorations that we simply did not have access to before. So I decided I wanted to make a new series on how to build. In this series, I'll go through a variety of topics, starting with this video that will show you the basics step by step, then going more in depth on each of these basics, and finally getting to advanced topics like tool assistance and large builds or projects. I also want to talk a bit about how I learned to build and show you the progression that I went through going from building things like this to this, which I'll show you a time lapse of me building later on in the video, so stick around if you want to learn how to do that. And here's a house that I'm sure you have all seen before. You just started building, or maybe you've hopped into your first survival world and you needed a shelter before night, so you punch some trees, make some planks and stairs, and there you have it, your first house. You may not realize it when you build this, and you may think it doesn't look that great, and come on, it doesn't. But in building this, you've already stumbled upon two important concepts that you're going to see in more and more depth as we continue here, and those are function and shape. You may already know what I'm getting at, but hold on to that thought as we move on to the next house. And since this is a basics tutorial, I want to ease into it with the next build. The first thing you might have noticed is that we've changed up the shape a bit. We're using a rectangle rather than a square now. And that's because in my experience, I find that these rectangular shapes make it easier to do roofs, as the straight roof shape that you'll see me building in a moment is far easier to decorate on than the four-way symmetrical roof we had peak up to one point in the last house. We're also going to punch in a window on this house, and when we do, I want to bring us back to that topic of function which I mentioned just a moment ago. Windows serve a function. In your own home, I'm sure there are plenty of windows or perhaps skylights or windowsills. And these are all functional parts of these spaces, as they serve a purpose both aesthetic and otherwise. Putting these in your builds is incredibly important as it provides a sense of realism. And this may not seem obvious now on this small scale, but when we get to larger builds in later episodes, you will definitely see how it makes a difference. Moving on, you'll notice I'm not just using planks anymore. Even though the shape is exactly the same as the last house, this one kinda looks better. And that's because we're using these logs as a way to break up the monotony of having one flat texture. We're gonna come to do this in many ways in future houses, but you should play around with it yourself and see what kinds of shapes and designs you can make just by changing certain blocks. There's not really much else to say for this one, so let's keep it going. This time, we're going to build on that idea of texturing even further by adding another texture with the cobblestone on the bottom to break up the sightline even more, and raising the house's height by one block to fit in a crossbeam support with logs. Using these log frameworks is something you'll see me doing a lot more from now on. As you can see, we've also changed up the roof a bit. Now we're adding an overhang both on the ends and on the front and back. And this is the first step in the next concept we're going to cover, which is depth. Depth is one of the most important concepts in building, and when I first learned about it, something really clicked in my brain, and that's kind of what kickstarted my journey into becoming a builder. What I'm showing here is probably the most basic form of depth imaginable though. All I've done is push the door back by placing it from inside and used glass panes instead of blocks. Otherwise, this house and the fourth house are exactly the same. But you can see how even these small changes make the house feel far more three-dimensional. And now you'll see we're going to change up the shape again. We're going to add a small protrusion at the front for an entrance, as well as a small section out the back. These are only moving things by one block, but you can see how even just this adds a bit more interesting shape, which breaks up the monotony, just like how we did with texturing. It adds depth, just like we did with the window and door in the last example, which you'll notice we've kept in this one too, and depending on the context this building would be put in, these modifications may also be providing a function. Maybe you're starting to see by now how all of these things are really one and the same. They're all connected to become more than just the sum of their parts. But there's still one piece to this puzzle that we haven't gotten to yet. But before we get to that, there's one other thing I want to talk about first. You don't have to use wood for your wall texture. Of course you don't. Here you can see a really simple cobble and stone mix that I'm going to be making, and I could do an entire video just on different types of textures and colors and playing around with all that, so if you're interested, please leave a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments down below. Anyways, I want you to imagine for a moment that this is a peasant's house with a thatched roof. Imagining the lore and the backstory of your builds will help you come up with ideas for how you can decorate them better. And that's our next basic, decoration. So for this house, I'm throwing a cobblestone border around the roof to make the wood in it pop and stand out. Keep in mind, this is also an example of texturing. Also, some blocks and slabs mixed into the roof make it look kind of messy, thatched, like I mentioned a moment ago. And I'm sure those wheels are turning and maybe you're getting excited to build something yourself already, but stick with me for a cinematic at the end that's going to put all of these concepts together into a small little build I prepared just for this video. And we're coming up to the beginning of the end with our second last house. It's going to be the last one as well that we're using this basic frame for, but you'll see how even with a simple base shape for our house, we can make something fairly remarkable. What we're going to do is change up those textures again to give you some more examples. We're changing up the roof style to make it stand out more. It's going up by 2 blocks instead of 1 now. Remember, this is also an example of shape. I wanted to add a second floor as well, so we've pulled up the back section and put a second roof on that. Keeping in mind, it's not just one big shape and a bunch of little small shapes and decorations that you'll have in your builds, but you really want to mix and match a bunch of big shapes, which will also give you more options, such as this second roof I've made. On top of that, this is the first house where I'm building an interior. If you're interested in that, you can download the world from the description and check it out, but interiors are not my forte, so maybe you creative people might have some innovative ideas that are better than my own. And finally, we have arrived at the last house in our tutorial. This time, you guys already know the basics, but I wanted to make something that really shows them all melding together, as well as talk about some of the roadblocks of building while this plays. And you'll notice I'm raising it up on a platform. When you do your builds for real, they will not probably be on a flatland. You'll either be using a generated world, either vanilla or mod generation, or maybe you've made it yourself in World Painter or World Engine. So it's important to remember to build them into a context, and the function decorations of your build will often greatly depend on that context. I'm also building this one on a diagonal. This is a very important thing to do to add more variation and overall shape into your builds. I cannot stress that enough. However, I understand that it seems daunting, but you don't need to worry, because I've got you covered. Later in the series, I'll be making a video dedicated entirely to diagonal builds, and I will give you all of the tips and tricks that I've learned to simplify them. For now though, keep working on your fundamentals because you are doing fantastic. You'll notice as well, I've used some colors here that may seem unintuitive. I've made a green wall out of concrete. Well, this is a more advanced example of texturing, but putting in small flashes of color is a fantastic way to draw the viewer's eyes around your builds. The reason we put things like these on the second floor is to draw the viewer's eyes upward, to admire the grandeur of the structure from below. And I'm gonna add balconies, overhangs, and a tower for more interesting shapes, decorations on the walls too. But this wall that you're looking at, I got completely stuck on and I could not figure out how to decorate it in a satisfying way. And sometimes in your builds, you are just going to get stuck. If playing around with different shapes and blocks isn't working for you, I encourage you to really think outside the box and come up with a completely different solution. In this case, I imagined that if this house were in a village, there would probably be a house or some other building next door. So I decided to make a pathway between them, using these fences as hanging ropes going between the two buildings, maybe like a clothesline or something to hang lamps off of. This really gave me some breathing room to keep the decorations simple on this side. Otherwise it would just be overcluttered. Anyways, adding another interior and we're done. You've learned the basics of building, and everything else really is built on these fundamentals. But this is just the first episode in the series, so you can be sure that I have a lot more to talk about. But you've heard me talk for a long time now, and if I remember correctly, I promised to build at the beginning of this video that would show off what this might look like on a slightly larger scale. So without further ado, please sit back, get yourself a snack or drink, and enjoy.